And now there's questions about who's pushing this. We know that Soros is funneling money that's pushed this. We know that the Communists for America are involved with this. And so I think they're all real concerns about how this is going to go. And bear in mind, many of these are the same people who've been leading the anti-ICE protests that have, in some cases, turned violent.
But what's wrong with, even if George Soros were funding it, what's wrong with that?
On CNN's Table for Five, Abby Phillip sat down with MAGA commentators Lydia Moahan and Tim Parrish, alongside Anna Navarro, to discuss the growing No Kings protests across the country. But almost immediately, the debate revealed something telling. Instead of focusing on why Americans were protesting, some voices shifted toward questioning the protest itself, suggesting outside influence or hidden agendas. And that raises a simple question. When citizens speak out against power, is that something to fear? Or is that exactly how democracy is supposed to work? Subscribe for more conversations like this.
Now, this will certainly be one crowd size that gets Donald Trump's attention. Today, across America, thousands upon thousands say they're protesting the president's actions and speaking up for the First Amendment. Organizers call it No Kings, accusing Trump of acting like a monarch. Republicans all week, though, have chosen to call it something pretty different.
Hate America rally.
Hate America rally.
Hate America rally.
We call it the Hate America rally.
The farthest left, the hardest core, the most unhinged in the Democratic Party.
This will be a Soros paid-for protest where his professional protesters show up.
It's all the pro-Hamas wing and the Antifa people. They're all coming out.
The rallies also produce a noteworthy split screen. The government is still shut down. And not only is there no end in sight, but neither side is even talking to each other. In fact, the House isn't in session right now. And while federal workers aren't getting their paychecks, over at the White House, Trump hosted a fancy dinner in honor of donors to his $250 million ballroom. I can't figure out, and Lydia, maybe you can help me with this, why all of a sudden is this No Kings rally so triggering to Republicans? There was one before, and it kind of passed almost without much notice, at least among Republicans. What is it about this one that is so problematic?
Bear in mind, no one is challenging anyone's right to protest, but you mentioned there was a previous No Kings protest. Somebody actually died because there weren't any safety precautions that were taken. Somebody brought a gun and was shot. So I think Republicans are worried about the safety of protesters both on the right and the left who are involved with this. And now there's questions about who's pushing this. We know that Soros is funneling money that's pushed this. We know that the Communists for America are involved with this. And so I think they're all real concerns about how this is going to go. And bear in mind, many of these are the same people who've been leading the anti-ICE protests that have, in some cases, turned violent.
But what's wrong with, even if George Soros were funding it, what's wrong with that? I mean, this is America. He's not allowed to fund a protest?
People are absolutely allowed to protest, but bear in mind, this is stemming in part from an ideology that's challenging the duly elected president.
I mean, again, what is wrong with that? I mean, what is the problem?
And bear in mind, no one is saying this shouldn't happen. People are allowed to protest freely.
Yeah, I guess that's the part.
I'm just Republicans to say, I don't like it.
I'm just not understanding why all of a sudden it's, traitorous to go out in the streets and protest the president when that's, in fact, what you're allowed to do in this country.
Yeah, and no one, I want to reiterate, no one is challenging the idea that people can go peacefully gather and protest. That's not an issue. What we are saying is we want people to do so peacefully. We don't want them to burn things down. We don't want someone to get shot on the streets. The last time they had this protest, there was the military parade, if you remember, that was happening. So it kind of fell on deaf ears and it didn't get covered as much. But yeah, people can go protest. People can do whatever they want. But when you trace the dollars and you trace the support, it does go back to some left extremist groups, Antifa, pro-Hamas groups that are in fact putting
There's no evidence of that, by the way.
There actually is. There's federal reports suggesting that maybe they may be linked to it.
Wait. Sorry. We've said no one's challenging.
Here's where the contradiction really starts to reveal itself. During the discussion, Lydia Moahan makes a statement that sounds reasonable on the surface. She says, essentially, everyone has the right to protest. And that part is true. That's the First Amendment. That's one of the core freedoms in American democracy. But then comes the familiar pivot, but, and that word changes everything. Because once the sentence becomes, people have the right to protest, but, the focus quietly shifts away from protecting that right and toward questioning the legitimacy of the people exercising it. You hear this pattern often from MAGA voices like Scott Jennings, Ben Ferguson, and other pro-Trump commentators who regularly appear on panels like Abby Phillips. The protest itself isn't debated on its merits. Instead, the protesters are reframed as extremists, radicals, or somehow anti-American. And that framing matters. Because when dissenters are painted as dangerous or illegitimate, it becomes easier to dismiss their message entirely. Now consider the irony here. The rally being discussed is literally called No Kings. That phrase isn't radical. It's deeply rooted in American history. The entire founding of the United States was based on rejecting the idea of a ruler who could not be questioned. The Boston Tea Party itself was a protest against a king. So when Americans gather today under the message No Kings, they're invoking one of the oldest traditions in the country, the belief that leaders are accountable to the people. Yet during the conversation, figures aligned with the MAGA movement continue framing these protests as something suspicious or dangerous. At times they're labeled Hate America rallies. At other times they're linked to groups like Antifa or other supposed outside agitators. But here's the key democratic principle that Abby Phillip keeps circling back to. Even if someone dislikes the protest, even if they strongly disagree with the people participating, the right to assemble peacefully doesn't disappear. Because once political leaders or commentators start deciding which protests are legitimate and which ones are not, the right itself begins to erode. And that's the deeper tension Abby Phillip exposes in this exchange, whether protest is truly respected as a democratic freedom or only tolerated when it supports those already in power.
Right to protest, and yet, what I heard from Republican leaders this week is that the protesters were terrorists. I heard them constantly, from the Speaker of the House to U.S. senators to Trump cabinet members, equating the protesters with Antifa. Now, those would be bad words in any other circumstance because it's First Amendment protected speech, and saying it's terrorism, that's a morally wrong thing to do. But this is worse than that, because just last month, this administration designated Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization.
Do you disagree with that?
They are
Good.
Yes, I do. They are equating protesters with terrorists, and by equating protesters with terrorists, they're creating a chilling effect, and they're opening the aperture to investigate them. I'll tell you why. NSPM 7, National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, that was passed by the White House, issued by the White House last month, says that people who directly or indirectly support those domestic terrorist organizations can be investigated. By that standard, they're saying that protesters and people who organize protests where Antifa might show up could be investigated. And then this week, the administration took control, or made moves to take control, of the criminal division of the IRS. This would be like if George W. Bush had said Code Pink was Al-Qaeda, or people protesting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were associated with the Islamic State.
I think that's a stretch. I think
case.
that people who do these protests, that do them peacefully and they make their voices known, is okay. When you get to the place where you're burning stuff down and you're destroying cities, that's another issue. And when you trace back and you look at who support these groups, who's organizing these events, it's absolutely linked to people who've done the things that I just mentioned.
Let me just say, I'm at this table. I actually went to the No Kings rally in June. To me, they were organically created. People chose to go because they are unhappy with what's happening in this country. I think there's much more unhappiness today, even than there was back in June. What I saw was people of all creeds, all ages, people with different backgrounds, all coming together and exercising their First Amendment right of assembly and of freedom of speech. I think that at a time when people feel that the government, some people in this country feel the government is bullying them into silence and fear. This is a way of showing that we are not afraid. I did not go because Soros told me to go. I did not go because the communists told me to go. I went as an American to exercise my rights. I didn't see any of the things that you all are suggesting.
If you were really fearful about fascism, you would not be allowed to protest. That's the irony in all of this, is that people are allowed to demonstrate freely.
Totally
Republicans
true.
are 100% okay
No,
with that.
wait,
And it kind of undermines their whole point. Meanwhile, they have signs that say, Trump is a Nazi.
So what?
I think you're so right that
that's by the way, his vice president called him a Nazi too.
The fact of protesting is a demonstration of people's rights. in a democracy. But you just said Republicans have no problem with it, and yet they've spent the entire week demonizing
There were like
people.
4 sound bites. Sean Duffy, by the way, I actually have a quote from another Trump cabinet member who said, "I'm all about free speech. I'm all about protest. It's the great American way. I'm concerned about who's paying for it and who's organizing it."
Here's where the full picture comes into focus. Abby Phillip keeps hammering the same point throughout the discussion. It doesn't matter who paid for a protest or who helped organize it. In a true democracy, Americans don't need permission to gather, speak out, or criticize their leaders. That's the essence of the First Amendment, a principle MAGA pundits on panels like this seem to struggle to grasp. Ana Navarro summed it up perfectly. The issue isn't the protest itself. It's the inability of many MAGA voices to accept that millions of Americans might genuinely oppose Donald Trump. And that's revealing. Because when disagreement is treated as illegitimate, the conversation doesn't focus on issues or safety. Instead, dissent is reframed. The protesters must be paid, manipulated, or somehow not normal citizens. That's not debate. That's delegitimization. This thinking isn't just on television panels. It shows up in everyday interactions. The narrator recounts a conversation with a lifelong MAGA supporter in his hometown. When he mentioned that older Americans, even people in their 70s, were attending a No Kings rally, the immediate reaction was disbelief. "Who's paying them?" he asked. When the answer was no one, the explanation shifted. "Then they must be mentally ill," he said. Pause and think about that for a second. If someone supports Donald Trump, they're rational, reasonable, and patriotic. If someone protests Donald Trump, they must be paid, mentally ill, or hooking up at the rally, even if they're a Vietnam veteran in their 70s. This is a mindset that refuses to see ordinary citizens exercising their constitutional rights. It's not concern about safety. It's erasing the legitimacy of dissent. And that's exactly what Abby Phillip and Ana Navarro are pointing out. In a functioning democracy, citizens should be able to disagree with those in power, peacefully, publicly, and without fear of being labeled a terrorist, mentally unstable, or un-American. Peaceful protest isn't just legal, it's fundamental. It's how democracy was designed to work. It's how ordinary Americans, from every age and background, hold their leaders accountable. And the takeaway is clear. Whether you support the No Kings protests or disagree with them, the principle is non-negotiable. The people have the right to raise their voices, and anyone trying to delegitimize that right is undermining the very democracy they claim to defend. Because when protest itself is questioned, the system begins to weaken, one step at a time. And that's exactly what's happening when MAGA pundits treat dissent as a threat rather than a right. This is democracy in action, loud, messy, uncomfortable, and necessary.